In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in black and white emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of America in Black and White, where we are coloring conversations on the canvas of America. Tonight, we have a very special guest joining us. We have Dr. Shakir Abdullah. Dr. Abdullah is a seasoned higher education practitioner and scholar and diversity optimist. His academic research in the area of multicultural competence and expertise in the practical application of inclusive strategies. Dr. Shakir Abdullah is the belonging firm established, is the founder and lead consultant for Practical Diversity Associates, a full-service leadership, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging firm established in 2011. Our services are appropriate for organizations and individuals who are seeking professional development or a general education related to diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and belonging. What distinguishes PDA from competitors is our personalized approach, deep expertise in multicultural competence, and our founder's extensive background in educational leadership and community engagement. Dr. Abdullah spent more than 20 years in higher education and worked at nearly every level in that field. He supervised more than 40 staff and has served in senior leadership roles for the past decade. He earned his undergraduate degrees from Wittenberg University, his MA in higher education and student affairs from The Ohio State University, and his PhD in the administration of higher education from Auburn University. He also earned an alternative dispute resolution certificate from Capital University Law School. His education includes extensive international study, including travel to Lombardy, Malawi, and participation in programs at the University of Cairo, that's Cairo, Egypt, and Lancaster University, Lancaster, England. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to the show Dr. Shakir Abdullah. Hello, Dr. Abdullah.
Charles, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm excited to talk with you tonight, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, and happy to expand on that as we go throughout today's show.
Yes, so before we get started, is there anything you'd like to add to your bio before we get the show going?
So there's probably a lot more to add, but I think we'll leave it at that for now. But my background is broad, had some really unique experiences in life, and I think they'll come out over this next hour and a half as we talk about my journey and talk about where we are today.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. And what we'll start with your work as a higher education practitioner. And so can you tell us first, what inspired you to pursue a career in higher education?
Great question. I think that's a good question, and I could probably talk about that all day. But the reality is, I didn't know what I didn't know about work life, what was after college. I'm a first generation college graduate. My parents went to college, but they didn't graduate. But they set the tone in our house that we would be folks who appreciated and engaged and really took advantage of education. And so a little bit about my background, and this is where we start talking about that extra stuff that's not in the bio. I'm the fourth oldest of 20 children from a blended family. And so yeah,
Wow.
I'll let you pause on that.
Wow.
So and I tell people that and they're just like, what? Huh? And but the reality is that growing up in a unique environment, we didn't all live together growing up, but we all spent extensive amount of time around each other. And so when you grow up around that many personalities, you really learn how to engage with different people in different ways. You learn how to find your niche. You learn how to find your peace within chaos, so to speak. But the reality is that our parents instilled the love for education in us at an early age. And so because of that, it was always understood that college was the next step for us. The reality is that, not all 20 of us graduated from college, but all 20 of us had a chance to go to college. And I think together we've got somewhere upwards of 18 to 20 degrees, right? Something like that in terms of all together. And so education was just instilled in us from the beginning. The reality is that we didn't know what to expect with that education or with that educational experience. We just thought, okay, we'll just go and we'll figure it out. And that's kind of what we did. I ended up going to Wittenberg University. It's a small liberal arts school in Springfield, Ohio. Shout out to the Wittenberg Tigers. I went to Wittenberg because it was a small institution. I had a chance to still play football, and it was a place that I really, really enjoyed on my visit. Got there, had a chance to do just a little bit of everything while I was at Wittenberg. Um, I was in the experimental theater. I played football, joined a fraternity. I was the president of our Black Student Union. I got to travel around the state to connect with other students who were at schools that were similar to Wittenberg. And all of those experiences really instilled some confidence in me. When I came out of high school, I was a shy kid. I didn't talk a lot. That wasn't my thing. But the environment that Wittenberg cultivated allowed me to grow. Allowed me to grow into my leadership. I got to be involved in coursework and programs that really helped me to expand my toolkit and help me to lean into some spaces and some ideas that I wasn't familiar with, that I wasn't used to. And all of that started to come together for me. But the one thing that led me to a career in higher education, well, I shouldn't say the one thing. The first person, I should say, that led me to a career in higher education was the person who recruited me. There was a gentleman by the name of Christopher Thompson. He does good work. He's a consultant. He does similar work that I do. He does leadership development, also engages and understands the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But Chris recruited me to Wittenberg, and I had the opportunity uh, to get a work study job in the admissions office working with Chris. It was important that I got a work study job because it's how I helped to pay for college. I had a half tuition scholarship based on my academics, but the rest of it had to come from somewhere. So it had to come from loans, it had to come from outside scholarships, and it also had to come from work study. And so the work study opportunities I had were either in the cafeteria at Wittenberg or in Chris's office. I didn't want to work in the cafeteria because I had just finished a job my senior year back in Canton, Ohio. It was at McKinley Life Care Center. I worked in the kitchen at McKinley Life Care Center. It was a retirement home. So I was delivering food and preparing the food and doing all that good stuff. And I was like, nope, I've had that experience. I don't want that again. And so I didn't take the job in the kitchen. But Chris offered me a job in admissions, working with him as an admissions assistant. And so I got to learn for the first time that, hey, there's a possibility of having a career in higher education, in admissions, and doing this kind of work. I had no idea that this was a career. But what eventually happened was, over the course of the next 4 years, I worked in admissions all 4 years. I had the opportunity my senior year to be an intern in the admissions office, really working full time as a undergraduate student, recruiting students from all over the country, and just really had some great experiences. And that led me to really the beginning of my career in higher education. And I think for me, growing up I didn't have exposure to really blue collar careers or anything. I mean, I should say white collar careers or corporate careers. I didn't have exposure to that. My father was a firefighter. My stepfather was an entrepreneur. He sold incense and fragrances all around the country. And so, we always knew how to work. We worked. I had a job since I was 14, paying for my own clothes. And one summer I picked strawberries to make money. So I knew about working. It was just I didn't know that these were some different options for working, because I think oftentimes when you're first generation college, you're also first generation corporate, right? And so you
Yeah.
start to become exposed to so many things, and these things start to evolve, and these opportunities evolve, and that exposure makes all the difference. And so that exposure from Chris Thompson to the admissions office was really the thing that prompted me to kind of start this career in higher education. And then from there, so many other opportunities emerged. But I had no idea that this was a career. I majored in business as an undergrad because I thought if I major in business, I can get a job, right? I had a scholarship from National City Bank, which was a local bank. And so that was actually my first white collar job. I wore a shirt and tie. I was a bank teller between my senior year and my freshman year, and I worked at the bank every summer while I was in college. And so that was the beginning of my exposure to something different from what I was used to. So yeah, that's a long way of saying,
Mhm.
I started my career in higher education because I was inspired by Christopher Thompson.
Okay. So, how do you define your role as a higher education practitioner?
Yeah, so for me, the role is broad. My goal in the work that I do is helping students to achieve their dreams, and I do that because people help me to achieve dreams that I didn't even know I had. Right. So I talked about Christopher Thompson, um, Kelly Reveling Cobb, uh, people like Catherine Wagner, who was my speech teacher at Wittenberg, Ken Benny, who was the director of admissions. He ultimately hired me in admissions. Dr. Janice Edwards was a person who helped me understand that I could go to graduate school. So for me, it's all about giving back and helping folks reach their dreams, even if they don't know what those dreams are, because people did that for me. And so, whatever role I occupy in higher education, I'm always motivated by that notion of helping people to achieve their dreams, whatever they may be. And so my role is defined by that,
Mhm.
but the work that I do is broad, and I can talk a little bit about that, but I don't want to go on forever.
But that's interesting. For your role there as a practitioner, because I think about our platform here, which is about reaching back and
Mhm.
picking up the underserved, marginalized LGBTQ communities.
Mm.
And to inspire people and motivate those people to actually want to do better. So, can you tell us a little bit? How can the work that you do? How does that translate to reaching into the communities and inspiring these individuals?
So I think for me, the work is about making sure that folks have a pathway where there seems like there's no way. I think for me, it was really, really important to understand that the resources that institutions provide, some of the resources that are now being limited by executive orders and by laws being changed across various states, those resources were the lifelines for folks who didn't know how to navigate the collegiate experience. I know I didn't know what I was doing half the time, but I had people and I had resources and I had programs that helped to guide me, that helped to support me. I talked about the scholarship that I got from National City Bank. I talked about Dr. Janice Edwards. She was our director of multicultural affairs at Wittenberg University. And so she oversaw our minority organizations. I looked at some of those organizations. They helped open the door for me in terms of leadership development. I got on the board for our Black Student Union as a sophomore, I think as a sophomore, and started working my way up because I mean, I needed that. I needed to be pushed. One of my guys, one of my good friends, Rodney Hopkins said, "Hey man, you need to be in this leadership role." And I'm like, "Whoa, no, I don't want to do that." Right? I didn't want to be out in front because when you're in front, you got to deal with all that. And I didn't want to be in that role, but it evolved. And eventually I became the president my senior year. I mean, I worked with others across campus, people like Bianca Bell and some other folks at Wittenberg, to create a unity march, right? We were connecting with the community because there was, this townie versus campus divide, and it was important for us to make sure we got out there and connected with the community, and by connecting with the community, it helped our students feel more welcome, right? So people had a place to go get their hair cut, they had places to go and worship on the weekends, there was a connection, right? And so for me, this work is all about being a bridge. It's being a bridge to populations and communities that are underserved, that are marginalized, folks who don't always see themselves reflected in leadership or in mainstream communication or mainstream representation at institutions. And so that's the work that I do, and that's the work that I've always done. And I think it really has helped make a difference for the students that I've worked with, right? And I think it's made a difference for me because I've always felt like I was fulfilled, right? And it wasn't a situation where, I felt like I had to be marginalized or I had to not show up uh, fully, right? This whole notion of code switching and things like that. I was fortunate. The work that I've done in higher ed and the example that I've tried to set is that I didn't have to code switch and folks didn't have to code switch around me because, who I am is who I am. And I try to make sure that folks appreciate that opportunity to be themselves as well. So that's just really the nature of the work that I've always done in higher education.
Wow. You know something? You just said a million and one things that I'm sure that the light bulbs went out all around the world. Everybody that heard that. Can you tell us, like, what kind of initiatives do you guys have, to actually target and to help those people, to come into the fold of going into, getting into higher education, getting that college experience and learning?
So one of the things that I'm doing with my company, Practical Diversity Associates, is making sure that I am connecting with young people, and really even, and I have to make sure I'm thinking about people who are returning to higher education. I have a program that we run through our company called College Degrees, and so the degrees, it stands for Developing Effective Goals, Resources, Emotional Intelligence, and Entrepreneurial Skills. And it's really designed to help people understand that there is not a singular pathway to college. There's not a singular pathway to success. And maybe it's not college, maybe it's the military, maybe it's a trade school, maybe it's an internship, maybe it's an apprenticeship, or whatever it is. People have to know that all of these resources are available. And this is part of the story that I tell. And these are part of the resources that I like to share with folks so that they understand that there are multiple pathways to college and through college. And this is important at this time because many of the resources, many of the programs that I have historically worked with are being written out of higher education, right? I spent um,
Mhm.
5 years at the University of Minnesota as the assistant vice president for equity and diversity. And in that role, I oversaw our women's center, I oversaw our GLBT center, I oversaw our multicultural center for academic excellence. I did community outreach and engagement. I also did fundraising, right? And the reality is there are many states and national laws that are saying you can no longer have these programs, right? We used to have our multicultural graduation. Those are the kind of things that are being outlawed. Those are the kind of things that are being pushed away. At my alma mater, the Ohio State University, where I earned my master's degree, the university shut down the Office for Diversity and Inclusion. And this was an office with a more than 50-year history that was founded by Frank W. Hale Jr., who is a pioneer in this work, did outstanding work, right? He has a building named after him, the Hale Center, which still remains at Ohio State. But the rest of the Office for Diversity and Inclusion is gone. They've wiped it out. The Multicultural Center, where I worked as a graduate student at Ohio State, I worked in African American Student Services and got to learn about all the different cultures and the other organizations that were around the Multicultural Center and a part of the Multicultural Center. So I got to grow and develop in these spaces, and these spaces are all gone. They're wiping them out. They're being marginalized, and so all the work that I've historically done, a lot of that work is gone. I was fortunate in my last role in higher education. I served as the vice president of student affairs, and so I had a broader oversight, right? I had a broader range of units that I could work with, and so that helped to expand my reach and helped to expand my skill set and my leadership acumen. So it was excellent to have those experiences, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the pathway to those roles, right? I served as the director of the
Exactly.
Multicultural Center at Auburn University, and this was a space where students could come and learn and be engaged across differences. We had a sign on the front of the Multicultural Center that said, all cultures welcome. We had to be deliberate so that folks could understand that everybody had a chance to be represented, everybody had a chance to be connected. But the reality is that the perceptions of the work that we did was that it was only for a specific population, and the reality is that the work that we did was for all the students that were at our institution: international, domestic, white, black, Asian, Hispanic. um, you know, it was for everybody who was going to show up as a part of our campus community. And if you didn't feel like you were part of our campus community, let us know so that we can do what we need to do to make sure that you're embraced, to make sure that you're engaged, and to make sure that we have the resources to help you thrive.
Wow. So that experience at Auburn, because that in itself sounds
Mhm.
unique, that you actually had a place that's called the Multicultural Center and everybody's welcome, invited, whatever have you. What was that experience like for you?
So it was different. I'm originally from Ohio. I grew up in Ohio, and when I finished at Wittenberg, I moved to Atlanta for just a little bit, and then I moved back to Ohio. So most of my professional career, most of my personal life was lived in Ohio. Um, had a chance to move to Georgia. My wife is from Columbus, Georgia, so we had a chance to move back to Georgia. And Columbus, Georgia is about an hour from Auburn, and so we were closer to her
Mhm.
family. And the chance to serve as the inaugural director of the Multicultural Center at Auburn was something that I jumped at, right? I thought, oh, this will be a great opportunity to experience it. But I had to get over my culture shock first, right? So I was in the deep South. Uh, I was at a very conservative institution, and I was leading a multicultural center at a time where, folks weren't really sure what to do with a multicultural center. They weren't sure how to address it or how to engage it, which is why I had to be deliberate in creating partnerships. And so Auburn was really one of those first places where I had to, well, not the first place, but like Ohio State, I had to get out and really make some strong partnerships across campus, partnerships with our counseling center, partnerships with our student affairs unit, partnership with human resources so that we could do training for all the staff. We did some safe zone training for the staff and created a program based on a student survey and a class project. So there was a lot of work that I was able to do, but it was dependent upon me being collaborative and me getting out of my office and walking around and connecting with as many people as possible. Because, um, you know, if it was up to most of the folks there, the Multicultural Center would have withered away. And it ultimately did. It ultimately did a number of years after I left. But it was a real culture shock. But the thing I appreciated is that even in different spaces, you can find community and you can find people who want to uh, support all the students at your institution. And so I had to go out and I had to go and look and find those people. And the reality is, I was probably most disappointed in the people who I thought would be my allies because they were not. And in fact, my dissertation was inspired by that lack of support. I was confused why people in these roles, people with these titles and these identities, I was confused why they were not doing the work and not committed to the work for the students. I mean, I was young and energetic, so I was excited about the work, and I couldn't believe that other folks weren't. And so I did a survey. I did my dissertation. It was a nationwide survey of diversity services professionals in higher education, the people who did the kind of work that I did. I wanted to find out how they came to this work and what inspired them to do this work. And ultimately, what I found was that um, your identity didn't matter in this work. Where you were from didn't matter in this work. Your gender identity didn't matter. Your sexual orientation didn't matter. Your age, your number of languages spoken, none of that mattered. What mattered most was your desire to learn, the desire to learn about other cultures and your own culture. Those were the number one factors in terms of someone being multiculturally competent. And it was an epiphany for me because I thought, oh, you have to have these experiences in order to do this work, because I was thinking about my own journey. But the reality is that you had to have that curiosity to learn about folks who were similar and folks who were different. And that is what made all the difference in multicultural competence, or in your ability to connect, and your ability to learn and do this work.
So, what could you tell, or what advice would you give to our audience, for people that are actually listening, to this plethora of things that you're giving out here, talking about the experiences and how things went and how they operated? What are some advice you could give people that would want to come into an environment
Mhm.
like that, and how they can actually
Yeah,
adapt?
so I think the number one piece of advice I would give is make connections. Find your tribe, so to speak. Find the people who will be supportive, the people who have done this before you, the people who you can lean on and get advice from, right? That is critical, because if you find those folks who are going to look out for you, those folks who are going to help you to navigate the environment, then you'll be able to thrive. There's research that talks about the fact that you have to have some connections in order to thrive and remain and graduate from an institution. If you don't have those connections, it is much harder to graduate. It is much harder to persist through graduation and to do well at an institution. And so I would encourage folks to find community. Look for community. Be deliberate about looking for community. Find the people who inspire you and go hang on to those folks. Find the folks who have been successful and go hang on to those folks. Find a faculty or a staff member and learn from that person if they, have some light that you want to attach to your light, right? Those are the things that I would encourage people to do, and that will allow you to thrive, right? Because the reality is that all your allies, all your advocates are not going to look like you. They're not going to have the same experiences as you. But if you are deliberate in finding those folks, finding good people, it's going to make all the difference. I was fortunate in terms of the connections that I made at Wittenberg. I was just over the weekend at the house of one of my fraternity brothers, and we had some another fraternity brother in town. And we were talking about how the fact that we have been connected for 30 years, and those over the course of those 30 years, we have uh, been nothing but iron sharpening iron, right? Um, uh, me and three other my fraternity brothers, we have an accountability meeting that we have every Monday morning at 8:30, just to make sure that we're working towards our goals, personal, business, and otherwise, right? And this is the thing that helps you to thrive. If you find good people, you find good friends, and you find those folks who are going to encourage you, those folks who are going to support you, folks who are going to challenge you to be your best, right? That is what makes all the difference. People will say, there's a saying, right? You're not going to find eagles flying with pigeons or chickens or whatever the saying is, right? You're not, right? So get with the folks that are going
Wow.
to elevate you and elevate with you, because the reality is that sometimes you're the wind beneath their wings, and other times they're the wind beneath your wings, right? And it all works together when you have good people working with you. So I would encourage folks who are stepping into those spaces to find those folks who are going to love you and support you and challenge you and just be there for you, sometimes not even saying a word.
Mm, wow. Can you share a defining moment in your career that solidified your commitment to this field?
Yes. That's a great question. There were a few defining moments, but I think um, one of the ones that I'll think about is back on it was on September 11th. I was working at an institution, September 11th, 2001, when the Twin Towers
Mhm,
collapsed. Um,
mhm,
I was working at an institution, and it happened. The Twin Towers were hit, and we were gathering all the students together to check on the students and to say, let's make sure all these students are okay. And then I shared with one of the staff people. I was like, well, I'm impacted by this as well. And the person said to me, well, you don't count. And so I thought, yeah, yeah.
No.
And it was interesting for me because I was trying to understand why I didn't count, right? And this is something that I've pondered for a number of years just to try to figure out what did they mean? Because I knew the person and this is a good person, yada yada, right? But it was the impact that that had on me that in this person's eyes in this moment, I didn't count. And so it was really, really important for me to make sure that I counted and everybody else I engaged with in higher ed counted as well, right? And so that was a defining moment for me because it helped me to realize, okay, I've got some work to do. I got more work to do, and I need to go and get my master's so I can do more at an institution and not just be at an entry level. And so that was an inspiration to go ahead and get my master's. And then another defining moment for me was a few years later. I was studying abroad in Lancaster, England, and talking with students in England, and they were sharing their perspectives. There were students from all over the world, and it was a moment where my identity as an American came to the forefront in ways that it hadn't happened previously,
Before.
right? And I was like, wait a
Mhm.
second. I thought I knew something. I don't know anything. I need to go ahead and get a PhD and really study and do some work. And that was another defining moment for me. It wasn't until, a number of years later, 8 or so years later, that I ultimately got my PhD. But those were a couple of defining moments that helped me to realize that there's work to do, and I need to make sure that I always count and people always know that they count with me. And so those are some defining moments in my career that helped me to stick with this work.
Now we're gonna transition over to your work, as a scholar and you and being a diversity optimist. Now,
Mhm.
I gotta say, when chatting with you about that, and when we were, kind of had this summation and so forth, I want you to know that that was like really, really interesting to me because I guess in just having that conversation and listening to you explain that, it just got my brain rattling because it just kind of made me think of like a million and one things, and
Mm.
it's got my mind spinning because I don't think I know everything, but there are a lot of things that I'm familiar with,
Yeah.
and like, but it's the way that you was explaining that I want you to kind of like drop some of this knowledge here on the audience tonight because I think it's really important. As a scholar,
Mhm.
what areas of research are you most passionate about?
Right. And so I appreciate you kind of referencing our conversation, but for me, it is this whole notion of multicultural competence, right? And multicultural competence, it consists of three things:
Mhm,
knowledge, skills, and awareness, right? Uh,
mhm,
Knowledge, skills, and awareness of people who are similar or people who are different from you, right? And so this
mhm,
was an area for me of research that really resonated with me because I was really curious about how people came to do the work that we do as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some people
mhm,
do the work or take the roles just because of their identity. They say, well, I'm a member of this community. I represent this or I represent that. And to me, that's a challenge. There's actually some research that talks about why that shouldn't be the case. It's this notion called the multicultural myth. Just because you're a member of a community or you represent an identity doesn't mean that you can do effective work as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have got to have some skills, some knowledge, and awareness behind the work that you're doing. You can't just show up because you look like you belong, right? You actually have to belong, and you have to make sure that you have um, a knowledge base for the work, right? And I think that's a little bit of what has impacted diversity, equity, and inclusion on a national scale. There were too many people doing the work that didn't know what the heck they were doing, and it's a challenge, right? And so for me, I really wanted to make sure that I had a knowledge base as it related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, all these different spaces. So I had to do research. I had to do work. I had to have some professional experience. I needed to listen to people. I needed to read. I needed to write. I needed to do all this stuff. Presentations at national conferences and all of that. That was important to me because I wanted to make sure that I had some credibility in the field. And so to develop the knowledge, skills, and awareness that are necessary, I think that's a space, and that's a space that I'm really, really passionate about because um, I can't help people develop if I don't have any knowledge, if I don't know what's happening, if I don't know anything about multiple communities, then I can't support and engage with multiple communities. If I don't
mhm,
have the skills to transition between communities and to train people and to meet people where they're at and to help develop the people, then I'm no good, right? And if I don't have the awareness of when I need to do that, then I'm also no good, right? Because I can have all the book knowledge in the world, but if I don't have the awareness to know when to apply it or when to make sure it's at the appropriate level, then I'm no good, right? And so all of those things combined are necessary for me and for others to do this important work when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, right? You've got to have some research. You've got to be grounded in all of this theory, and you've got to just be aware, right? You got to be aware of all of these things because I have taken the time to do that work, because I've got that experience. I remain optimistic, right? I remain optimistic about diversity. I call myself a diversity optimist because I think that we are much better together. I think that as we engage with each other, as we get to know one another, is critical, right? It's important that we recognize that we were made from nations and tribes, but not to despise each other, but to get to know one another, right? And
mhm,
so we can't get to know one another if we're closed off, if we don't have the skills to engage and try to communicate with people across languages and across styles. It's critical, right? I spent some time when I was in Europe. I spent a week in Paris, and je ne parle français. Parlez-vous anglais, right? So I don't speak French, but I asked the
okay,
people if they spoke English. And when you make that overture, people are much more apt and much more welcoming to you and ready to connect with you because they appreciate it. They appreciate the notion and they appreciate the idea. And so hopefully this rain that just showed up is not impacting the sound, but it's like people appreciate you much more if you make an effort to get to know them, right?
yes,
It's much more difficult to connect with people who you to only want you to know them, right? It's no back and forth. There's no exchange. That's a
mhm,
problem. That's a challenge. And so for me, trying to apply all of these things, trying to be in all these different spaces, it helped me. It helped me to grow. It helped me to learn. I was in the Dominican Republic y yo hablo español muy bien, entiendo mucho más que yo hablo, pero cuando hablan en español, las personas creo que yo soy dominicano, right? I speak Spanish. I speak Spanish pretty well. I understand more than I speak. But when I was in the Dominican Republic, those people there thought I was Dominican, right? And so it's like when you have all of these experiences, when you get to show up in these different spaces and you get to talk to folks, it makes a difference. You have a great experience. When I was in uh, Egypt, right? I told the people, I said, Beno Jamaatul Muslimin Ameriki, right? In Arabic, I told them I was from a community in America. And so my experience was much different from the other people who were there who didn't have any Arabic language experience, right? I mean, I can't speak Arabic very well, but I had some Arabic, right? And so it made a difference. It made a big difference in how I was treated and how people engaged with me. The same thing when I was in Malawi. I spoke just a little bit of Chichewa, and the folks embraced me, right? And I looked around, and they looked just like me and my brothers, my sisters, my cousins. I'm like, man, this is amazing. But the reality is, if you don't get out of your own comfort zone, you can't grow. If you don't take the opportunity to learn from folks who are different and folks who are similar to you, then you can't grow. And I say that because sometimes we look at people and we think, oh, you're just like me. And the reality is we couldn't be any further apart because we didn't take the time to get to know each other. And just because we look alike doesn't mean we are alike. So let's learn about who we are, learn about the communities we come from, the ways we exist, the ways we appreciate, the ways we live, the ways we love. Those are all the things that you get to do when you challenge yourself to do more than just be comfortable in your own space.
So, in the process of the research that you were doing, especially when it came to the DEI part,
Hmm.
did any of your research, give you some roadblocks, where it was like all of the policies, procedures, and the way things were written, that people wanted to carry that out to the whole max, that had no growth in it whatsoever? If you reached and you saw and you found any of that, what were some things that you thought to change or to do about that?
That's a great question. And I'm trying to think if there was anything in place like that, because here is what I found. I found that a lot of places, a lot of institutions, they don't know what they're doing when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it was always helpful, particularly in the work that I do now, working with companies and organizations and helping them reach their diversity goals. It's important to kind of do an assessment of what's happening in that space right now. How are people feeling welcome or unwelcome within a community, right? So, surveys, focus groups, some of those different things, one-on-one interviews, those are the things that help you to understand what's happening in an organization. And it also helps you to understand if there might be policies that are blocking people's success or blocking people's abilities to fully exist in who they are, right? And so I can't think of policies or programs that existed that were limiting people's ability to engage, right? Um, there's always an opportunity to do more, but sometimes you're limited by uh, your status, right? A private institution can do more than a public institution can do, right?
True,
Public
true.
institutions are limited sometimes by state statutes, whereas private institutions have a lot more flexibility in what they're able to do. And so I can't think of like a specific policy where it was limiting people's abilities to thrive, but I can think of different ways where we created spaces, resources, and tools to help people thrive more. And so let me give you some examples there. Um, One of the things that we did, I'm thinking about at the University of Minnesota, we created an alumni advisory board for the Office for Equity and Diversity, and that
Mhm.
alumni advisory board was able to give us insight into the experiences they had as undergraduate students, and so they pointed out some things that we could do differently in terms of events and programs. So that was one of the things that we did. Another thing I did at the University of Minnesota was created a new program, because what we found was that people in the community were not
Mhm.
aware of the university. They didn't know what was going on. There was a big disconnect. And how I figured this out, I was at an event in the community at a school. We had our mascot, and the kids at the school had no idea who our mascot was. And I was shocked. I was shocked. I'm like, what in the world's going on? And so I recognized that we needed to connect with the folks earlier. And so we created a program called Core 2025. That was community outreach,
Mhm.
retention, and engagement 2025, with a goal of increasing the number of diverse students at the university by 2025. Not to be confused with
Mhm.
Project 2025. Right? So, 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 so this this program was designed to go into the schools, starting in eighth grade, exposing the students to the university, bringing the students to campus, bringing campus to the students on a regular basis, and then we would host these students 2 to 3 times a year on campus, right? Just to open the doors and help them to understand that these opportunities exist for you. You may not be aware of them, but now you're aware of them because we've given you the resources and we've given you the tools to help you thrive and to help you to understand what these opportunities look like, right? And so those were the kind of things that I would do every time I saw an opportunity or a need to expand a resource. That was one of the things that I did. And it was not because folks were unable to thrive or they were limited. It was just that, hey, we can do more. We can do more to make sure that people feel welcome. We can create different opportunities. We can create trainings. We can create pathways. And so one of the other pieces that I was able to do, um, at Auburn University, one of the things that we did is we worked with our counseling center and our student affairs division to create a safe zone training that was adopted by our human resources division. And so this was a result of a survey that said folks who were part of the GLBT community didn't feel as welcome at Auburn. So we were able to create a training that helped to raise awareness of that, right? So I mean, those are the kind of things that I was able to do, just expand what we already had in place. It wasn't a situation where um, I can think of a policy that was just so egregious that we had to shut it down. It was just that, okay, what can we do to expand the resources, access, and abilities and opportunities for folks to thrive at the institutions that I was a part of?
So, how do you stay informed and engaged with the latest developments in diversity
Yeah, so
studies?
I'm a reader. One of the things that I love to do is read, I try to read books on a regular basis, and I listen to more books than I actually read now with Audible and some of those tools. But I'm regularly reading the Chronicle of Higher Education. I also have a subscription to Inside Higher Education, and so every day I'm adding to my toolbox and my toolkit in terms of what's happening, latest policies, latest issues, latest opportunities, challenges, and threats to higher education. And so, because I'm a knowledge junkie, I usually stay on top of those things. I don't, always read educational journals or things like that. But there's a tool for that. There's an opportunity to do that, right? Most often, I read short article summaries, and if I want to go and read the research paper, then I'll go back and do that. But typically I'm
Mhm.
not doing that because I'm not writing as an academic right now. If I'm writing, I'm writing for a publication, something on LinkedIn. I'm writing for
Mhm.
my own purposes, just to raise awareness and things like that. And because I'm not doing another dissertation, I'm not reading all that. But I read stuff
Mhm.
every day.
Well, oh, Well, I can just imagine the difference between an abstract and reading one of those big long papers. But let me ask you this, because just as I just listened to all the tools and the things that you're saying that were that's at arm's reach, and this is not political, okay? So I want to make sure you understand that, because we're not talking about Project 2025, but uh, with the destruction of the Department of Education that's at hand right now, and knowing that that we're actually at the point of burning it to the ground, and so when at the point of burning it to the ground, what are some of the things that maybe you have thought about, some of your colleagues, or maybe people in general have thought about creating a whole new system in place to rebuild once they finish this destruction?
No, that's a great question, and it's certainly something I've considered. I think what we have to do is pool our resources. We need to bring together uh, private investors, private industry, individual persons to create institutions and to support institutions that are maintaining this work, right? And so there are a number of HBCUs, there are a number of different uh, private organizations that are doing this work and that are continuing this work. And I think we have to put all of our efforts into those spaces, into those organizations. We cannot rely on the tools that were previously used, because those can be easily dismantled, as we see. And so it's really, really important to understand that there have to be alternative pathways and alternative options to help preserve our history and to preserve our future. Because I'm a diversity optimist, I think that's what we will do, and I think that's what we can do. The reality is that if so many institutions, so many organizations can so easily be scared into getting rid of history, into integral programs that are part of our institutions and organizations that have really made the difference and really changed the face of this country. If they can just get rid of those at a threat of losing federal funds or whatever it may be, then those are institutions that are not ones we can rely on. We can't rely on those institutions into the future. So it's important that all folks come together, and all folks of goodwill, right? When it comes to this work, if they all come together and stay committed and stay dedicated to this work. And so you got to create institutions, you got to create tools that help to preserve this history. And here's the thing I will say: historically, in Black communities, this history has been preserved. This history has been passed down, and we know this history. I don't think Black communities are at as much a risk of losing this history as white communities are, because I think part of the pushback and a lot of this anti DEI stuff is not really aimed at people of color, because we're going to know our history, we're going to learn this history, we've got it embedded, because it's never really been taught in schools, K-12 in particular. But I think what critics have come up with is they've recognized that this emerging generation, this next generation of white students and white folks, have woken up because they are aware of the history that's been hidden, and they want to hide that history again. I think that's the challenge we're running into with a lot of this work. So we've got to create alternative institutions, alternative organizations that help to preserve and distribute this history, so that people understand that we have always been a multicultural America. We have always been a country of diverse perspectives, right? We look at what happened to the indigenous people in this country. Uh, that has happened time and time again for different populations, and it's a problem, right? It's a problem. Indigenous people were kicked off their land. They were decimated through war and famine and sickness and all of those things. And then they were relegated to reservations. During World War II,
Mm,
Japanese Americans were put in internment camps because, they thought that those Japanese Americans would somehow sympathize with the Japanese who were fighting us in World War II. The German Americans, the Italian Americans, they were not put in intern camps, right? They were not put in those intern camps, right? We have to pay attention to what's happening because there's always been this push in this country to separate us by race because that has been a tool that has been effective, right? Lyndon Baines Johnson talked about the lowest white man theory, right? This idea that if you can make the lowest white man think he's better than a black person, then you can control that white man and get him to support you in everything that he does. It's important for us to understand this history, to know this history, because it when the playbook is run again, we already know what the play is, right? And so we already know what this play is because this has happened before. And I think the folks who are disingenuous and say that that's not what's happening are folks who have no credibility, right? They have no credibility. And we have to make sure that we keep calling them out every chance that we get because this is a moment that will pass, right? And that's why I'm optimistic because this moment has always passed in the country, right? Right after emancipation, we had a great moment for black folks, right? We had all of this stuff was happening for black folks, businesses, folks like Pinchback in Louisiana because the senator. I mean, we had Hiram Rebels. We had all these people who were serving in federal government as senators and representatives, Congress people. This was a time where the U.S. was almost living up to its ideals. And then we had the Hayes-Tilden Compromise that ended Reconstruction, right? It ended Reconstruction. Reconstruction was this time when we were thriving. That Hayes-Tilden Compromise, Rutherford B. Hayes from the great state of Ohio, where I'm from, he compromised and said, hey, we'll get the troops out of the South. We'll get the federal troops out of the South, and we'll let, the South oversee its redevelopment. And what did that do? That led to Jim Crow, the Jim Crow era, where black folks had no rights that the white man was bound to respect, right? So we got to know this history. We've got to address this history on a regular basis. And if we do that, then, we can make no mistake when things are happening like are happening now in terms of the pushback against diversity, equity, and inclusion.
ooh, you know what? Now, I'm sorry, but I have to ask you one more question on this topic because I mean, this is like really, really, it's in your face. Um, now because of being the majority, but being considered the minority, and the system being controlled and owned by the minority, which gives them the leg up and the power. With that being said, what are the chances of just even if a slimmer bit of this system is left? What could happen to go ahead and just create a whole new system outside of that anyway, where we can do better regardless of the case? What are the chances of something like
So
that happening?
I'll say the chances are slim because I think
Uh-huh.
what would help us form a more perfect union is us living up to the ideals of the Constitution, right?
Right.
It- I mean, the notion of our Constitution is that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let it happen. Let us pursue happiness. Stop trying to police our happiness. And I think that's the problem. They're trying to police our happiness. They are not putting in place the resources and the opportunities that we're supposed to have in terms of being a shared society, a collective society. People talk all the time, say capitalism is bad, and all. Capitalism isn't bad, but the kind of capitalism that we're practicing in the U.S., where those with the money have the most voice, that's the minority I think that we have to pay attention to. Those folks that are billionaires and that are creating policies that only benefit them. I mean, it would be excellent if everybody was, truly philanthropic and said, hey, I'm good, I've got enough, so let me make sure that everybody else has something. I want to make sure that we really have universal health care. I want to make sure that kids have enough to eat. I want to make sure that veterans have somewhere to live. I want to make sure that, folks of all identities have the right to pursue happiness as they see it, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That life is the ability to live. The liberty is the freedom, right? Because, I mean, you can be alive and still in jail, right? We got to shut down the prison
Yep.
industrial complex. We got to figure out, how do we really rehabilitate folks? How do we give people a chance in society? And how many people are in jail because they were trying to feed their families, or an administrative law that they violated, whatever. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. We got to have prison reform. There is so much we need to shift. But the reality is that, prisons are the new Jim Crow, and there are systems in place that people are making money off of other folks' misery. That's a problem. If we could figure out how to make sure that everybody had a chance for life, liberty, and to pursue happiness as they define it, then we will be good. And so, in that way, I don't think we need to remake the system. I think we need to make sure the system is living up to the ideals that it says it is. And I think that's the biggest problem we have in our country.
So let's go a little bit over here to as you mentioned, multicultural competence. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that. And tell us, how do you define multicultural competence, and why is it essential in higher education?
And so, again, multicultural competence is three things: knowledge, skills, and awareness. This is critical for higher education, because what happens is, if you are able, or if you are interested in supporting diverse students, then you need to first know who those students are. You got to have some knowledge of who folks are, where they're coming from, what their backgrounds are like, and what their life has been like historically in the country and in the region where you're at, right? So you've got to have that knowledge. You've got to have the skills to be able to engage in folks who are similar and folks who are different from you. This is really, really, really critical. And I think the challenge we run into is there are many people who work in higher education who are lacking the social skills necessary to connect with people. They have the book knowledge, they know a subject back and forth, but the reality is they don't even know how to teach, because folks are not taught how to teach in the university. People teach how they were taught. There's not a course in graduate school. There's not a lot of courses, I should say, in graduate school that say this is how you teach a college course. This is how you connect with college students. The theory, the research on student identity development, those are things that I didn't learn until graduate school. And those were things that were essential. If you were a higher education and student affairs major, then you got this. But if you were any other major, you weren't getting this information. You didn't get information on racial identity development theory by Janet Helms and William Cross. You didn't learn about the different stages of growth and engagement for folks from different religious backgrounds. You didn't learn about the history of the Stonewall Rebellion and some of those things. You didn't learn that stuff unless you were in these specific courses on diversity, right? And so you miss out on understanding who your students are. You miss out on understanding what the communities that they come from. And if you don't have that knowledge, then you can't reach them. You can't teach them, right? You are not culturally aware. You're not culturally responsive. You're not doing any of that stuff because you don't have that awareness, or you don't have the skills to be able to go and pull that stuff together, because you need that knowledge, but you also need the skills to be able to teach and connect with folks. You can't just look at a person and assume their experience. You need to make sure you learn their experience directly from them, so that you can have a better understanding of who folks are. And then lastly, that awareness, right? That awareness of how to engage and how to be with people who are similar or who are different, right? I keep emphasizing that because it's so important. My dissertation, I turned it into a book. It's called A Baptism by Fire Profession, right? This talks about how there's no preparation for the work that's done in diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. They said it's a baptism by fire job. You're just thrown to the wolves and you got to figure it out, right? And the same thing happens with faculty and staff in other spaces. There's not a lot of real good preparation, and so you got folks who haven't gone through the programs or through the academic pathway, and they don't know how to do the work. They're just there. It's like, well, I needed a job. Okay, now you got a job. I promise. Now you got a job, but now you're also doing a disservice to the students because you don't have the knowledge, skills, or awareness to engage with these students. And I think that's really important. And this is why I try to emphasize multicultural competence so much, because it's really critical not only to your success as a professional, but it's critical to the student's success, because if they have an opportunity to work with professionals who know them, who can engage with them, and who are aware of who they are, it makes all the difference, right? Because then they will feel like they're seen. And if you're seen, then you're present and you like, oh, okay, they get me, they appreciate me, and they're going to help me thrive. So that's important. And so that's why I lean into the multicultural competence so much, because it's just an area that's so necessary for the success of people who are moving into the higher education space. And so I talk about it particularly in higher education, but it's also important in K-12. It's important that the teachers are teaching diverse students and they understand how to engage with those students. It's also important in the corporate space, because these workspaces are diverse. People are coming from so many different backgrounds. And if you have the ability, if you have some multicultural competence skills, then you have that ability to engage and work with people and work with customers who are diverse, folks who are similar, and folks who are even different from you. And I think that's a piece that we have to help people understand, because sometimes people look at it and say, hey, that's just theoretical, that's academic, that's book sense and book knowledge. But the reality is that this is something that is applicable to every walk of life.
So, what training or resources do you recommend for developing multicultural competence among faculty and
Yeah, so
staff?
I mean, there's the number of trainings and development opportunities I would recommend. I think it's really critical that folks start to do some work in terms of culturally responsive teaching and leadership. I think that's important. If you can get engaged with culturally responsive teaching and leadership, one of my good friends, Dr. Muhammad Khalifa at Ohio State, he does that work, and that's an area where folks can kind of learn from him and get that together. Um, it's really important to understand anti-racism. Ibram Kendi talks a lot about anti-racism. He's got a couple different books that will help folks um, navigate that anti-racism and get that understanding, because he talks about the history of racism in his book Stamped from the Beginning. He talks about
Yep.
the history of racism, its origins, how it played out in the United States historically, and it's really just important to understand anti-racism. I think people get so confused and so frustrated about Kendi's work, and the reality is that they haven't read it. They haven't paid attention to it. And if they actually read it, then they would have a much better idea of what it means to be someone who's anti-racist, right? And he says it's not enough to be non-racist, but you've got to be actively anti-racist, right? So those are a couple of the trainings: culturally responsive leadership, anti-racism. Those are a couple of different training opportunities. Multicultural competence in general, just awareness of multicultural competence. If you can understand that, those are a couple of different trainings that would make a difference if folks engage in those. And in addition to that, just trying to think, identity development theory is also a good one. I talked about Helms, I talked about Cross, and it just helps people understand how people go through those phases, right? Helms and Cross talk mostly about Black identity development theory. It talks about um, the different stages that particularly students of color go through. You've got your pre-encounter stage. The pre-encounter stage is this notion where you haven't been exposed to your identity in a negative way, and then you have an encounter moment. An encounter moment is when you are forced to reconcile your identity with how you've been treated or how someone addressed you, right? And then you have this immersion phase where you go into your identity and you learn about who you are, and everything about you is what you love, and you're not messing with nothing that's not connected to you. And then you have the immersion phase, is where you start to come out of that and you understand that, hey, okay, there's different people out here with different perspectives, and it's nothing is all black and white, right? Nothing is all black and white.
Right.
But those things, getting
Mhm.
involved and understanding that theory, understanding that practice, it really can make a difference. And I think people just have to be deliberate in terms of doing some self work and understanding their own identity first, right? And I think sometimes that is a big hurdle for folks, because they only want to come and learn about others, but they don't want to do the hard work about learning of in terms of learning about themselves. Once you have an idea
Mhm.
of who you are and how you operate and engage culturally, then you can start to relate to other people, right? And so that's that first piece of multicultural competence. So you got to have that knowledge. Start with that knowledge of yourself, and then you can engage with other people.
So let's move over to the inclusive strategies that you've mentioned. Can you explain what inclusive strategies you've implemented in your programs?
And so when we're talking about inclusive strategies, these are ideas, programs, processes, or trainings that allow people to feel seen and to be seen um, in the different spaces that they occupy. And so, what I do often, I start with the story of who you are. Tell us who you are. It's really important that folks get a chance to share themselves with the community. So if we're in a group, then everybody has an opportunity to introduce themselves, not in a sense of name, title, where you're from, but you get to talk about the story of who you are. Tell the story of where you've come from and how you come to be, right? Um, I often talk about, my name and my name origin. My name is Shakir. It's Arabic for one who is grateful, right? So my parents, I'm what you call a rainbow baby. So my parents experienced, a loss of child between my older brother and me, and they called me a rainbow baby because I was a rainbow at the end of the clouds, right on the other side of the clouds. And so my parents were grateful that I was born healthy, and so they named me Shakir, so one who is grateful, right? And so that's important for me to tell the story about who I am, because it gives people insight that you just don't get on a regular introduction, right? And so when we're using inclusive strategies, it's important to give people the opportunity to define themselves. And sometimes, it's the first time they've been able to do it in that setting, right? And so you've got to have a sense of psychological safety that has to be there, a space where, what people say won't be used against them. When I start my trainings, I usually start with agreements about how uh, we're going to do this work, right? We agree that, nothing that someone shares in this space here is going to be shared outside of this space without permission. We agree that we're going to listen with the intent to understand, right? We agree that we are going to, operate in the best intentions, and we're also going to allow people to share, divergent ideas. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can't get to nothing. What James Baldwin says, uh, not everything can be overcome. What do you say? Not everything faced can be overcome, but nothing can be overcome until it's faced, right? And so that's a notion. This is this idea that you got to address what's happening. And if you don't address it, then you don't have any chance to overcome it or any chance to engage in the hard topics, right? And so those are some of the things that I try to do as I'm moving into my trainings, because I want to make sure that everybody has permission to engage, um, in the ways that they want to engage, in the ways that can be meaningful, right? And so I try to make sure I set that kind of stage before we get to work. And so those are some of the inclusive strategies that I try to implement. I try to make sure that folks have their own voice, and uh, and folks get a chance to share examples, because one of the things that's important about this kind of work is that it can't just be me up there talking. We need some real world examples. We need people to tell stories. They need to share examples of what they've gone through, examples of who they are and how they are. And then that can make all the difference, right? When people are telling their stories and colleagues get to know each other better, right? Because again, I say that, you know, our goal is to get to know one another, not to despise one another. And so that only comes from sharing. It only comes from sharing examples and engaging honestly and completely, right? I tell people all the time, the work that I do is not for everybody. But if you're interested in doing this work and you want to come do it, then come on, I got you. But otherwise, I'm not going to force feed diversity, equity, and inclusion training on you. And I think that has probably been one of the biggest mistakes of our industry, is they've tried to make it for everybody, and it's not for everybody. It's only for the folks who are curious, right? Because that was one of the things that I found in my research, is that the number one factor in multicultural competence is that desire to learn. And if you've got the desire to learn about yourself and others, then this work is for you. These trainings are for you. But if you have no desire to learn, if you've got a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset, then this is not the space for you, and you're going to make it more difficult for everybody who wants to learn. So you go, just have a good day. Don't come to my training.
uh, how do you engage students in conversations about inclusivity?
Well, I think students are much more open than some older folks, but it's the same approach, right? It's the same approach, providing that psychological safety, giving them permission to be vulnerable, giving them permission to share their stories. The biggest fear I think that a lot of young people have is that they're going to be judged for who they are, right? And the reality is, folks going to judge you anyway. So you might as well lean into your identity, lean into who you are. And once you do that, then you're allowed to thrive, right? Once
Mhm.
you embrace who you are, once you share and engage, then you're allowed to thrive. It's a situation where, I think students are curious, right? And I remind them all the time, you're students. You don't know what you don't know, but let us come to some knowledge and understanding together.
Mhm. The last thing here, so we talked about is I told you we do Black History
Yes,
365. When I ask you who were the greatest, most influential people in your life and your career, you mentioned MLK and Malcolm
absolutely.
X. And can you tell us how has Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X influenced your personal philosophy regarding education and
Absolutely.
diversity?
So I'll start with Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El Shabazz. He was such a giant, um, I guess, figuratively and literally. I think he was about 6'6". I mean, he was tall. He was tall, but he was a giant in our history because he was unapologetic in his blackness. He was unapologetic in his identity as a Muslim. He was unapologetic in challenging the status quo and in challenging, uh, you know, the thoughts at the time. I love going back and watching his speeches and his debates when he's debating folks on TV and helping to dispel some of the mythology that folks had about black people at the time. And he just made it plain, right? He has a speech to make it plain, right? These are some of the things that he did, and he really just helped me to understand what it meant to stand authentically in your identity and to embrace and to pivot and to evolve, right? He evolved
Yep.
from, I mean, his journey was amazing
Mhm.
because he was a genius in his class. He lost his father at a young age. He tells a story in his autobiography of going to the UNIA meetings, the Universal Negro Improvement Association meetings, that his father would lead. He tells a story of his mother being a Caribbean immigrant, and I mean, just learning his story, it reflects and represents so many black stories in America, right?
Yep.
Lost his father, they lost their farm, he had to move around. He was a smart kid, but he was dissuaded by his teacher from pursuing becoming a lawyer. He would have been a great lawyer, right? But his teacher said, "Nah, you can't do that because you're a little black kid, right?" And so he said, "Okay, I'm gonna do what I know I can do. I'm gonna turn to a life of crime." He did that. Went to jail, reinvented himself. There's another book. I mean, his autobiography, but there's another book by Manning Marable called "A Life of Reinvention." Malcolm X, "A Life of Reinvention." It talks about that notion, right, where he's gone through these different iterations of who he was, even up to his death. He had just got back from his pilgrimage to Mecca. He had embraced Orthodox Islam. He had created a new organization, and that organization was much more engaging and said, "Hey, I'm trying to work with everybody who wants to work with me to make sure we can get what we need," right? Which was a very distinct transformation from his work with the Nation of Islam, right? And so there are so many lessons in his life for us, in terms of we can always improve who we are, right? And so that's why I think Malcolm ranks so highly for me in terms of in Black history and the example that he set. Dr. King is also up there. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, and Dr. King was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, and so that is inspirational in itself. But my connection to Dr. King goes back even further. In third grade, I think it was the first year the nation has celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday as a holiday. I was a part of an essay contest as a third grader for the whole school, and I ended up winning first place for my essay on Dr. King. And the prize for first place was I was gifted books, and so I had three. I think I got four books. One was a dictionary. One was a book called Julie of the Wolves. Another book was Cry of the Crows, and there was another book called My Side of the Mountain. And so My Side of the Mountain became my favorite book. And I mean, I was a reader, and so for me to win books representing Dr. King and being able to win that contest, it gave me a sense of accomplishment, and it helped me on my academic journey. And so, following my time in third grade, I was moved to a different school, a predominantly white school from a predominantly black school, because I was in the Canton High Ability program, a gifted and talented program. And so, it put me on a pathway to education, and that, to me, was reflective of the journey that Dr. King went on. Dr. King graduated from high school early, graduated from Morehouse. You know, I think he went to Crozier Seminary and then Boston University to get his PhD. But he was on a different path. He was put on a different path young. I had to go away from school with my younger siblings. And so Dr. King's story was instilled in me. I was able to write that essay because my parents, they made us watch Eyes on the Prize. They made sure we knew our history and we were connected to that history. And so, Dr. King's story was at the forefront. I learned about Malcolm's story later, but it was just like this was my inspiration at a young age. And so, much respect to Dr. King, much respect to Malcolm X, and they have certainly been inspirations for me in terms of leadership and understanding that there are multiple ways to do the work that's necessary, and the work that's necessary is still here, right? It's not always going to be marching, it's not always going to be preaching, but those were some examples that folks followed, right? I remember one of my favorite rap group, Outkast. They had a line that said, you know, obsolete is the fist and marches. Speeches only reaches those who already know about it. This is how we go about it. And so to me, that was a passing of the torch. And it said, hey, you know, that was one way to do it. But now we're in a new era. There's a different way to do it. Right. And so for me, it was like I was always able to connect the struggle, and the struggle continues, right? And so I have to remember the lessons taught by Dr. King and by El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X, because those are lessons that stick with us even today. I'm seeing what's happening in LA and around the country with the ICE protests and things like that. Um, and there are lessons. There are lessons to learn and say, what happens to a dream deferred, right? Does it dry up and rot
Yep.
like a raisin in the sun, right? Or does it explode? I don't know. I mean, I'm messing it up, but you know what I'm talking about with Langston Hughes' poem, right? So it's important
Yes.
for us to
Yes.
understand that the legacy of the civil rights movement and the legacy of Black history is embodied in those two gentlemen, but they are just representatives of all the work that took place, all the work that happened behind the scenes. Dr. Betty Shabazz, Coretta Scott King, Bayard Rustin, all these people who were a part of this work. Uh, it's essential
Mhm.
that we recognize them every time we get a chance to, right? Dr. Carter G.
Mhm.
Woodson started Negro History Week that evolved into Black History Month, right? It starts with something. And for me and for many others, the start of their awareness of history is Dr. King and Malcolm X.
So, can you share a specific lesson from MLK or Malcolm X that you incorporate into your
Mm,
work?
that's a great question, right? Uh, I think with Dr. King, his quote that you know everyone can lead because everyone can serve is one that I lean into, because I don't have to be on the mic, I don't have to be featured on the podcast or whatever, but there's work to do and I can do the work. I can do it behind the scenes, I can do it quietly, I can do it loudly, but I got to do something. It's not enough for me to just uh you know be here. Being here is not enough. I got to do something. And so I think I lean into uh that quote by Dr. King. And in terms of Malcolm, uh, I think the lesson is just his faithfulness, right? And his evolution. Because every time he learned and understood better, he would do better. And I think that's something that I try to do.
Well, I had several. Oh my God, I had so many questions. Didn't get a chance to get all the questions asked, but at this point, just in closing, can you, is there any words of wisdom you like to leave with our guests? How they can contact you or connect with you on social media, your
Yeah.
website, any of
No,
those.
absolutely. Absolutely. My website is www.pracdiv.com. pracdiv.com, Practical Diversity Associates. You can find me on there. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you just looked up diversity, equity, and inclusion, you can just look me up by my name on LinkedIn. Those are the two primary spaces where we can be connected. I'm also on all the other social media platforms, but find me on LinkedIn and I'll make sure I get you connected with the work that I'm doing. But the reality is I just appreciate you, Charles, for the opportunity to have this conversation. I appreciate you for putting me on your platform. And again, I just want to be able to keep supporting the work that you do, because none of us can do this by ourselves. And the reality is we've got to be community and we've got to be in community. So certainly grateful to you for the opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you because, again, this was like totally enlightening. But I got to ask you before I go say anything else. Is it possible to have you back, to come back to the show?
Absolutely.
Because I've got to archive this one as part one. Got to have you back. Also, you said something that that I'm gonna do a blog post on, and I just want to get your blessing before I do it. When you mentioned the phrasing or the group of words when you said policing our happiness, I'm going to do a blog post on that. Are you
I'm
okay
with that? And connected to is that the Bill of Rights, right? The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's that happiness that they're policing. They're policing our pursuit of happiness. Right. Let us pursue it how we want to. And I want to see what you got to say about that. I like that.
Most definitely. But yeah, my blog is connected to LinkedIn. But what I'll do is once I do the post, I'll just put the link to your message inbox there.
All right. Sounds good.
Yes, sir. So I want to thank you for coming tonight. And you're going to come back. That's going to be even better, because there are so many questions I didn't ask, but I'm sure that the audience more than enjoyed this conversation and the things you had to say, because it was very educational and informative at the same time. Because there are a lot of people that don't quite get a lot of the points and things that are so pertinent and important, especially for this time, that it's like, it's these conversations that actually make the light bulb go off. And it's like, okay, well, what happened? You missed it. So now you got an opportunity to come back. So as you mentioned, community, which is what we're about, and all about building and connecting it. I just hope that, again, this is one of those shows that's got to keep it moving and got to keep it growing and expanding. I want to thank, you again, and for the folks that are out there watching on the YouTube channel. For all of you that have not yet subscribed, if you would just be nice, please subscribe and get all of the notifications. You'll be able to watch all of the shows live, as well as going back to watch all of the previous recorded shows and get all of the knowledge and information that we do give. Because here at America in Black and White, we are about community, and we are about making sure that as we color these conversations on America's canvas, that everybody from all walks of life get to understand the point that we're trying to make. And that is, when we say building communities, we're definitely going to be building communities. I want to thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I'm honored that you were here, and when we do get you back, I'm sure that it's going to. And I want to thank everybody for watching, and we have another great show tomorrow night. So you all have a great evening, and please come back and watch us tomorrow night as we have another great episode on America in Black and White.